When you establish firm boundaries, you do something profoundly unsettling to a narcissist. You expose the limits of their control. And control to a narcissist is everything. Their entire psychological framework is built on the premise that they can bend others to their will, manipulate their emotional responses, and maintain a position of dominance. But the instant you draw a clear, immovable line and refuse to compromise it, you challenge the very foundation of their power. This is not a minor disruption. It is an existential threat to the carefully constructed illusion they maintain. Narcissists operate in a world where other people's boundaries are mere suggestions, not rules. They push, they test, they violate. It starts subtly, a dismissive comment here, a small invasion of privacy there, and over time it escalates. What they are doing, whether consciously or not, is mapping out the limits of your tolerance. How much can they take before you push back? How far can they go before you break? And for many people entangled with a narcissist, these boundaries become increasingly blurred until eventually they seem to disappear altogether. But here's the essential truth. The moment you recognize this pattern and begin to enforce your boundaries with unyielding clarity, you interrupt the game. You show them, often for the first time, that there are consequences to their behavior. This is where the dynamic shifts, because a narcissist's power doesn't come from actual strength. It comes from the perception of strength. It relies on the belief that they are in control, that they hold the emotional reins. But boundaries puncture this illusion. When you say no and mean it, when you refuse to justify, argue, or defend your position, you assert that their influence has limits. And this drives them into panic mode because for the narcissist, losing control is akin to losing identity. Their fragile sense of superiority cannot withstand the reality that someone else might possess the autonomy to say, you cannot cross this line. It's also important to understand that boundaries are not simply about external behaviors. They are a profound psychological declaration. They say, I am an autonomous being with my own values, my own needs, and my own sense of self-worth. For the narcissist, this message is deeply unsettling. They thrive on relationships where the other person's identity is enmeshed with theirs, where the lines between self and other are blurred. Clear boundaries disrupt this dynamic by reestablishing the distinction between you and them. You are no longer a mere extension of their will. You are an independent entity. And that is intolerable to someone who requires constant validation to maintain their fragile self-image. And here's where the psychological depth of this move becomes clear. Enforcing boundaries does not merely frustrate a narcissist, it exposes their deepest insecurity. At the core of narcissism lies an overwhelming fear of inadequacy, a terror that without constant reinforcement, their sense of self will crumble. When you establish and hold firm boundaries, you communicate that your value is not contingent on their approval. You no longer play the role they need you to play, and without that role, their entire self-concept is threatened. This is why narcissists react so intensely to boundaries. You may notice a sudden escalation in their behavior. Manipulation intensifies. Guilt-tripping becomes more insidious. Or they may swing between charm and rage in an attempt to reassert control. This is not a sign that your boundaries are failing. On the contrary, it is evidence that your boundaries are working. Their panic is a testament to the power of your refusal to be controlled. What makes this move particularly effective is that it is both simple and profound. You are not engaging in a battle of wills. You are not trying to outmaneuver or out-argue the narcissist. You are simply stating calmly, clearly, and without negotiation what is and is not acceptable. And once you draw that line, you refuse to move it. This consistency is key. Narcissists are skilled at exploiting ambiguity. The more you waver, the more they will test. But when you maintain your position without apology or explanation, you create a reality in which their manipulation cannot thrive. It is worth noting that this process is not easy. It requires a deep commitment to your own self-worth. Many people who find themselves in relationships with narcissists have spent years internalizing the belief that their needs are secondary. Enforcing boundaries is not just an external act, it is an internal transformation. It means deciding once and for all that you deserve to be treated with respect and that you will no longer tolerate anything less. And there is power in that decision, more power than most people realize. Because the moment you stop seeking the narcissist's validation is the moment their control evaporates. They cannot manipulate someone who refuses to play the game. They cannot dominate someone who defines their worth from within. And ultimately, they cannot break someone who knows deeply and irrevocably that they have the right to their own boundaries. In the end, breaking a narcissist's control isn't about overpowering them. It's about refusing to be controlled. It's about recognizing that the most powerful move you can make is to define yourself, your values, and your limits on your own terms. And once you do that, once you draw that line and refuse to cross it, you shatter their illusion of power. And the beauty of it is that you don't need their permission to do it. The power is and always has been yours. When you withdraw your emotional energy from a narcissist, you dismantle one of the most powerful tools they rely on to maintain control. This isn't simply a matter of ignoring them, it's a deeper, more profound detachment. Narcissists don't just crave attention in the casual sense. They are dependent on a very particular kind of emotional feedback. They need to know they can influence how you feel, how you think, and ultimately how you behave. When you remove that emotional fuel, you destabilize the entire foundation of their manipulative power. To understand why this works, you first need to grasp the fragile nature of the narcissistic psyche. At their core, narcissists are not the powerful, self-assured figures they present themselves to be. In fact, quite the opposite. Beneath the grandiosity lies a profound insecurity, a gaping void they cannot fill on their own. To manage this internal emptiness, they seek out external sources of validation, and that validation comes from the emotional responses they extract from others. This is why narcissists provoke reactions, and whether positive or negative, it doesn't really matter to them. Praise feeds their inflated sense of self, but even anger or pain reinforces their belief that they are powerful enough to influence others. This is why they engage in behaviors that seem contradictory or even self-sabotaging. One moment they might shower you with affection, and the next they launch a cruel verbal attack. What they are doing is testing the strength of their control. Can they pull you in, push you away, and still hold your emotional focus? But here's the crucial insight. Without your emotional investment, their entire strategy collapses. When you stop reacting, when you stop feeding them the energy they so desperately need, it leaves them unmoored. When you stop feeding them, they lose their grip on you, and more importantly, on the carefully curated image of themselves they have constructed. This is why emotional detachment is such a devastating move. It denies them the very substance that sustains their fragile ego. Emotional detachment, however, is not the same as simply ignoring someone. Ignoring can still carry emotional energy, frustration, resentment, or a desire to punish. True detachment is something else entirely. It means you no longer allow their words or actions to penetrate your inner world. You refuse to engage in their psychological game. Their attempts to provoke, to bait, to elicit a response fall flat, not because you are suppressing your feelings, but because you genuinely no longer grant them the power to shape your emotional state. What happens next is predictable and revealing. When a narcissist senses that their influence is slipping, they often escalate their tactics. You might see a sudden outpouring of affection, a desperate attempt to lure you back in, or conversely, they might resort to cruelty, hoping to provoke a reaction through pain if they can no longer achieve it through charm. This escalation is not a sign that you are failing. It is evidence that you are succeeding. They are panicking because the emotional lifeline they have relied on is disappearing. It is also important to recognize that emotional detachment is an act of reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. For too long, the narcissist has occupied too much mental and emotional space, dictating how you feel, what you think, and even how you perceive yourself. Detaching emotionally means you are no longer willing to outsource your sense of identity to someone else. It is a profound declaration of self-respect. You are saying, in no uncertain terms, my emotional well-being is mine to govern. You do not have the right to control how I experience the world. And there is immense power in this realization. Because once you detach, you become immune to their manipulation. The words that once cut deeply now fall harmlessly to the ground. The guilt they used to impose no longer takes root. You stop explaining yourself, stop defending yourself, and most importantly, stop feeling the need to be understood by someone who has no genuine interest in understanding you. In essence, you free yourself not only from their control, but from the psychological entanglement that kept you bound to them in the first place. This move is not just about protecting yourself, it is about reclaiming the energy you once gave away freely. Imagine how much mental clarity you gain when you no longer spend your days analyzing their motives, anticipating their reactions, or second-guessing your own perceptions. That energy, once reclaimed, can now be directed toward building a life rooted in your own values. A life where your sense of worth is not dependent on anyone else's approval. And here's the truth. When you reach that place of genuine emotional freedom, the narcissist loses all power over you. They cannot control what they cannot access. They cannot hurt what they cannot touch. And without your emotional energy to sustain them, they are left to confront the emptiness they have spent their lives trying to escape. Ultimately, the most effective move you can make is not to fight for their approval or to try to change them. It is to withdraw the energy they need to maintain their illusion of control. It is to decide that your emotional well-being is yours to protect. When you do this, when you truly detach, you break the narcissist's grip over your mind and heart. And the beauty of it is this: once you reclaim your emotional power, it is yours forever. When you assert your independence and refuse to play the narcissist's game, you expose a truth they work tirelessly to conceal, that their power is and always has been an illusion. The narcissist thrives on the belief that they are in control. They manipulate, they gaslight, and they weave a complex web of psychological tactics to keep you uncertain, off balance, and emotionally dependent. But what happens when you no longer respond? What happens when you reclaim your autonomy and refuse to bend to their will? Their carefully constructed facade begins to unravel. At the heart of the narcissist's manipulation lies a profound insecurity, an internal void they cannot face. This emptiness is so intolerable to them that they create an artificial self, a mask of superiority and invulnerability. But that mask only remains intact if those around them continue to reflect it back. In other words, a narcissist's sense of self depends entirely on external validation. They need you to react because your emotional engagement affirms their sense of power and control. Without your participation, the mask cracks and the emptiness they are so desperate to avoid begins to surface. This is why your independence is such a threat. When you stop reacting, when you refuse to engage in their provocations or validate their manipulative tactics, you communicate something they cannot bear, that their influence over you is gone. And more than that, you reveal a reality they work relentlessly to deny. They are not all-powerful. They are not invincible. And without someone to control, they are left with the hollow truth of their own inadequacy. It's important to understand that narcissists do not seek relationships in the way healthy individuals do. For most people, relationships are about mutual understanding, shared growth, and emotional connection. But for a narcissist, relationships are about domination. They enter relationships not to give, but to take. Your independence disrupts this dynamic because it removes their ability to extract the emotional energy they depend on. When you refuse to engage in their manipulation, when you assert your boundaries and live according to your own values, you break their psychological hold. And the impact of that cannot be overstated. A narcissist's primary weapon is control. Control over how you feel, how you think, and how you see yourself. They rely on this control to sustain their fragile self-image. When you assert your independence, you shatter the illusion that they are the central force in your life. This does not simply frustrate them, it terrifies them, because without your emotional dependence, they are left with the terrifying reality of their own emptiness. It's no surprise then that when you assert your independence, the narcissist often reacts with rage or desperation. They might try to reassert control through love bombing, suddenly showering you with affection, apologies, and promises to change. Or they might escalate their tactics, using guilt, threats, or even public humiliation in an attempt to break your resolve. These reactions are not signs of love or remorse. They are evidence of their panic. They are flailing, desperate to reestablish the control they have lost. But here is the truth they cannot accept. Once you realize your independence, once you step outside their psychological grip, there is no going back, because what you come to see is that their power was never real. It was only ever the power you gave them. And when you take that power back, they lose the ability to define you. This is why independence is such a profound and transformative act. It is not simply about leaving the relationship physically. It is about freeing yourself psychologically. It means refusing to let the narcissist's voice become your inner dialogue. It means no longer seeking their approval or fearing their disapproval. It means trusting your own perceptions, your own values, and your own worth. And once you reach that place of independence, their manipulations become powerless against you. Consider for a moment the freedom that comes with this realization. No longer needing to explain yourself. No longer twisting yourself into someone you're not to gain their fleeting approval. No longer walking on eggshells, fearing their next outburst. Independence allows you to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your ability to live on your own terms. And nothing terrifies a narcissist more than someone who refuses to be controlled. And here is the profound irony. The more you prioritize your independence, the more the narcissist reveals their own dependence on you. They cannot exist without someone to control. Their entire identity is rooted in the ability to manipulate others. When you break free, you force them to confront the truth they have spent a lifetime avoiding, that without someone else's energy to feed on, they are nothing. The power then lies in your ability to walk away, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. The moment you choose to live according to your own truth, the narcissist's grip shatters. Their illusions cannot withstand the reality of your freedom. And once you realize that their power was never real, you understand a truth that will guide you for the rest of your life. No one can control you unless you let them. When you reclaim your independence, you send a message the narcissist cannot ignore. You are no longer their pawn, and you will not be controlled. And in that decision lies your greatest power, the freedom to live as your authentic self, beyond the reach of their manipulation forever. One of the most profound ways to break a narcissist's control is by refusing to engage with their emotional manipulations. At the core of their strategy is an attempt to provoke a reaction, whether it be fear, guilt, or the need for approval. They depend on your emotional responses to maintain their dominance. Without that response, their ability to manipulate you collapses. This is not a small thing. It is a profound psychological shift that redefines the dynamic entirely. The narcissist's game is one of emotional entanglement. They thrive on creating confusion and self-doubt, using tactics like gaslighting, blame shifting, and emotional withdrawal to destabilize you. Each reaction you offer, whether it's defending yourself against their accusations or trying to win back their approval, feeds their sense of power. And here's the uncomfortable truth. As long as you respond, they remain in control. Your emotional engagement reinforces their belief that they hold the keys to your self-worth. This is why your refusal to engage is such a devastating blow. It denies them the very thing they need to maintain their psychological hold over you. Think about it this way. When you stop reacting to their provocations, you shift the entire structure of the relationship. You no longer play the part they have cast you in. The narcissist operates on the assumption that they can pull certain strings and predict your responses when those strings no longer work, when you refuse to defend yourself against false accusations, when you no longer explain your boundaries, when you stop seeking their validation. They are left without their most powerful tool, and without that tool, their control begins to fracture. It's important to recognize that this refusal to engage is not about passive silence, is not about suppressing your emotions or pretending their behavior doesn't affect you. It is instead an active and deliberate decision to withdraw your energy from the manipulation. It is the conscious choice to prioritize your mental clarity and emotional health over their need for dominance. This is the essence of what psychologists call gray rocking, the practice of becoming as emotionally unresponsive and uninteresting as a gray rock. It is a strategy rooted in the understanding that narcissists feed on emotional engagement. Denying them that engagement cuts off their supply at its source. And make no mistake, when you disengage, the narcissist feels it. They may not admit it, but your refusal to participate threatens the very foundation of their identity. This is because at their core, narcissists lack an internally validated sense of self. Their entire worldview is propped up by the reflections they receive from those around them. When you no longer mirror their superiority or respond to their provocations, you disrupt the fragile psychological ecosystem they have created. This is why their reactions to your disengagement are often so extreme, ranging from rage and blame to sudden, exaggerated affection in an attempt to reassert control. But here's the key. Their reaction is not your responsibility. The narcissist will do everything in their power to draw you back in. They will exploit your empathy, play the victim, and even offer moments of kindness to confuse you. Yet every time you engage, you reinforce their sense of power. By refusing to participate, you reclaim the one thing they cannot tolerate losing, your autonomy. And this doesn't just free you, it exposes the fundamental truth that their power was always an illusion. Narcissists do not possess some inherent superiority or mystical ability to control others. Their power depends entirely on your participation. Once you withdraw that participation, once you stop defending yourself, explaining yourself, or reacting emotionally, they lose the ability to manipulate your reality. This shift isn't easy. Narcissists are skilled at pushing the exact emotional buttons that will make you question yourself. They know how to exploit your deepest insecurities and play on your desire to be understood. But there is a profound psychological strength in recognizing that you are not obligated to engage. You do not have to justify yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. And when you internalize this truth, the narcissist loses their ability to define your worth. There is something deeply empowering in realizing that you hold this kind of power. It means that no matter how manipulative or controlling the narcissist may seem, their power ultimately depends on your cooperation. And when you choose not to engage, when you refuse to play their game, you become a force they cannot control. This is the move that breaks their grip. Not confrontation, not explanation, not trying to change or fix them, just the quiet, unwavering decision to no longer give them what they crave, your emotional energy. And when you make that decision, something profound happens. You reclaim your freedom. You step out of the web of manipulation and into a life where your worth is no longer determined by someone else's agenda. And the most powerful truth of all, once you know you have this power, you can never unsee it. The narcissist's grip weakens the moment you realize you no longer need their validation, and once you reclaim your autonomy, their ability to control you shatters forever. A narcissist's sense of control depends on one crucial factor. They must believe that they occupy a central position in your mind. If you are constantly thinking about them, analyzing their behavior, or adjusting yourself to avoid conflict, then they have succeeded in embedding themselves within your psychological framework. This mental occupation is in many ways more significant than any physical control they exert. When you break free from their manipulation, you are not just walking away from a toxic relationship, you are reclaiming your mental sovereignty. And it is precisely this loss of mental dominance that threatens a narcissist the most. Consider for a moment how much of their power stems from the way they consume your thoughts. The narcissist engineers situations to keep you mentally preoccupied with them, whether it's through unpredictability, guilt, or manufactured crises. This isn't accidental, it's a deliberate strategy, rooted in the knowledge that if they can dominate your inner world, they maintain a kind of invisible leash over you. You might leave the room, but as long as you are still analyzing their words, trying to make sense of their behavior, or seeking their approval, they remain in control. Your mental energy becomes a resource they exploit to sustain their fragile ego. When you stop allowing them to occupy your mind, when you consciously decide to withdraw your attention, their power structure collapses. And this is not a trivial matter. For a narcissist, being mentally discarded is an existential threat. Their entire self-concept is bound up in the reflection they receive from others. They cannot bear the thought of being irrelevant when you stop thinking about them. When you move on with your life without looking back, it is as though they cease to exist in the form they require. This is why indifference, true indifference, is so devastating to them. It represents the ultimate rejection, not just of their behavior, but of their entire self-image. And here's the psychological reality. Narcissists are deeply insecure. Despite the image of superiority they project, their internal world is marked by profound self-doubt and a relentless need for external validation. This is why they cannot tolerate being ignored or forgotten. When you no longer invest mental energy in them, it forces them to confront the emptiness within themselves. Without someone to reflect back their self-importance, the illusion they have carefully constructed begins to unravel. And make no mistake, they are aware of this at some level. This is why they will go to extraordinary lengths to remain present in your mind, through love bombing, guilt tripping, or even attempts to provoke you into anger. Any reaction is preferable to being mentally discarded. What makes this so effective in breaking their control is that it shifts the locus of power back to you. As long as they dominate your mental space, they dictate the terms of the relationship, even after it's over. But when you reclaim your thoughts, when you refuse to give them that energy, you reestablish your autonomy. And here's the critical insight. You don't need to explain this to them. You don't need to engage in a dramatic confrontation or offer closure. In fact, those actions only feed their sense of importance. The most powerful move you can make is to withdraw your attention quietly and permanently, because without your mental engagement, their ability to manipulate you evaporates. Of course, this isn't easy. When someone has occupied your mental and emotional space for so long, it can feel almost unnatural to stop thinking about them. There may be a temptation to replay conversations, to seek answers, or to wonder if you could have changed the outcome. This is where discipline comes in. It requires a conscious, deliberate effort to redirect your mental energy toward your own growth and healing. You are not denying the pain or pretending the experience didn't affect you. Rather, you are choosing to invest your thoughts in something that serves your well-being instead of allowing your mind to be a playground for their manipulation. And the effect this has on a narcissist cannot be overstated. They may try to draw you back in using whatever tools they have at their disposal. They may shift from rage to remorse, from blame to flattery in an attempt to recapture your attention. But once you recognize the game, once you see that their power depends entirely on your mental engagement, you become immune to these tactics. You see their manipulations for what they are, desperate attempts to avoid the terrifying reality of their own insignificance. What's remarkable about this approach is that it doesn't just break their control, it liberates you. Because when you stop allowing a narcissist to live in your mind rent-free, you open up space for things that truly matter, your goals, your relationships, your sense of purpose. You reclaim the freedom to think, to feel, and to live without the shadow of their influence. And there is nothing a narcissist fears more than being forgotten, because in their world, to be forgotten is to cease to exist. At the heart of it, this is the one move that shatters their illusion of control. Not confrontation, not seeking justice, not even exposing their behavior. It is the quiet, resolute decision to stop thinking about them altogether. Once you do that, you take away the one thing they cannot live without, your attention. And in doing so, you reclaim the most powerful asset you possess, your mind.